The job of protecting the scene became much more difficult after the news got out. It can't be denied an apparent alien abduction was news.
The following day, the snow fell on the site, but there were hundreds of people came up there that day weekend, and most of them took away a part of the soil, the dirt, the grass, whatever they could get their hands on, they took it away. And obviously over that weekend as well, it obviously caught the national press, television, everybody was up filming. It was obviously quite a major story.
And among the first to put himself into the picture at the scene was a young UFO investigator, Malcolm Robinson.
At that time I was a young ufologist. I was ever keen to learn more about the fascinating mysteries of this subject, and immediately contacted the newspaper, got some details from the press reporter, and managed to take myself and a colleague, we went over to Deans near Livingston to speak with Robert Taylor. And we then went to visit the location where this incident had occurred. We saw that the police had fenced off the area. Some colleagues of mine from another society had brushed away the snow, and you could clearly see the indentations in the grass, which we have photographs of the society. We have photographs of triangular indentations, circular indentations, and track-like marks which were left on the grass.
It's hard to believe it's 25 years, Stevie, eh? The place has changed so much, the trees are so much taller, Stuart.
So what did happen to Bob Taylor that day in 1979? Did he encounter an alien spacecraft in a forest in West Lothian? Did someone or something attack him? Stephen Knox and Stuart MacDonald were work colleagues at the time.
I can still remember how surprised I was at the time that Bob had came out with a story like that, because the type of person he was.
Well, he wasn't a man that made things up. He was a very quiet man.
And this would have been the first sight you got as you came round the corner here, into the clearing.
The clearing is now half the size it was then, but in 1979 it was a hive of activity, not just the police and media. It was also a magnet for UFO investigators. Some of the investigators were anxious to believe. Others, like Stuart Campbell, were incredulous.
It was a member of the press who called me about that, telling me that an incident had occurred at Livingston. I was dumbfounded at the time, especially when he told me that there had been a robot or some aliens had emerged from an object and frightened somebody. But I obviously had to continue with the investigation of that event.
The first possibility to be considered was that it was all a big hoax. Bob Taylor was having everybody on.
Everyone agreed that Robert Taylor was a very reliable witness. Even the police, I was glad they were involved in this, they also confirmed that they could find no evidence that Robert Taylor was the sort of person who would make up a story. In fact, he was the last person in Livingston Development Corporation anyone would think would make up a story. I concluded that he was just a phlegmatic forester and incapable of making up this story. We had to believe that he saw something, or we had to believe that he was honestly reporting what he thought happened. So it wasn't a question of finding anything wrong with his story. It was a question of finding out what possibly could have caused him to have this experience.
I came to the conclusion that in the 3 interviews that we did with him, he never changed his mind. He stuck to his story. He was adamant that what he was telling us is what he saw. We had marks on the ground. His trousers were torn. We sent them for forensic examination.
Bob Taylor's trousers and long johns were sent to Lothian and Borders Police Forensic Science Laboratory in Edinburgh. Biologist Lester Knibb conducted the examination.
There was a bit of, as I recall, mud and material that fitted with his story of being out in the woods on that particular day. But obviously the main interest was the damage on each of the hips. Now the damage was not particularly similar on each side, but there were similar facets to it. And the particular one that I noted was that the tears went upwards from the bottom. Quite often, if it's tearing to clothing, it will be sideways or downwards. In each case you have a tear up there and tears up there. Both tears were quite ragged along the edges. So although they were different in dimensions, they were probably caused in a similar kind of way. It seemed to be caused by a mechanical type of action. In other words, something hooking on or grabbing the trousers and breaking the fabric and moving up with it. Interestingly, there were a set of long johns with this, and the damage had extended through to the lower layer.
A sceptical view is that these tears to Bob Taylor's trousers could have happened while he was struggling away from the scene, snagged on barbed wire, for example.
I probably would think not, for a variety of reasons. One is that most of barbed wire has multiple points at a single locus on the wire, and you might expect that to be reflected in the damage at each of these points. So barbed wire probably wouldn't rate as one of the choices for causing the damage.
Of course, forensic science has developed dramatically since 1979. DNA profiling has emerged and would surely provide some interesting new information.
I think probably not, because of the length of time that it's taken since the incident and the number of people who've handled this in the meantime. Most people would have poked in the damaged area, and there'll be DNA from a large number of people around that area. Trying to pick the original individual, if there was one, out of all of those will be next to impossible.
So nothing actually emerged from the lab examination of the trousers to shake Bob Taylor's story. That's not the same as confirming it, although that hasn't restrained their present keeper, ufologist Malcolm Robinson, from taking the trousers to the people as if they did.
The trousers have been in my possession now for around about 25 years, and in that time I have taken them to various venues here in the United Kingdom, on tours, on lecture tours from schools, colleges, all over the place, where I regularly talk about this fantastic case and show the physical evidence to go with this case.
UFO skeptic Stuart Campbell doesn't think the trousers prove anything.
And how do we know the trousers weren't torn before the event? A pair of torn trousers is not exactly evidence that he was attacked by robotic aliens.
In any case, Stuart Campbell has the rest of the so-called physical evidence in his sights. The mysterious tracks found at the site.
I wasn't sure what to make of them, but I did recognise some of the marks as those made by grass when it grows around objects lying in the grass. As an architect, I'd seen this very many times. In fact, most people will have seen it. If you leave a plank or something in grass, the grass will grow around it, and if you remove it, you've left a pattern, a mould of this shape in the grass. This looked to me like that, and I was a bit sceptical that any craft had landed in this clearing.
What about the 3-inch diameter holes in the ground?
I was able later to conclude that these looked like the marks you get when the pick is heaved into the ground. And why would anybody put a pick in? Well, to get the planks and wood out that had been trapped there, lying there for some time. So there was a reasonable mechanical building construction explanation for these marks, which I was sure had nothing to do with whatever Robert Taylor had seen.